They've got them. They're all in here. They said that they're. I've got all 3 of them.
Oh yeah, you do.
Whew.
You can feel it, can't you?
Oh, yeah. Jesus, man.
Yeah.
You start collapsing reality and you start denying this reality. It leads to problems. Mm-hmm. Unless you're going to leave this reality altogether.
You know, that first year, I was having people calling me at all hours of day and night. Just people who hadn't even seen it or heard about it, you know, and then related it to the Mothman phenomena that, what's going to happen in Chicago? Do you have any idea?
Whenever I go out on these excursions to film these episodes for you guys, 90% of the time I'm by myself.
It's 100% real. It is the most incredible thing.
I don't like the way this feels. Holy crap. All right, here we go.
I wonder if Corbell still takes his karate.
If there's going to be witnesses with something like that from the ground, if, there's no survivors, that's something that very dangerous, but I think they do it in Phoenix. We had the 1997 Phoenix Lights, where at 8:15, this huge craft flew over the city and tens of thousands of people saw it.
This place is imbued with energy. It's thick, it's heavy, it's sad, it's fearful, it's angry. It's all here. Behind me is the Georgian Hotel. Behind me is Long Island Sound. So today we're entering Devil's Hop Yard.
And as I came upon the enclosure, I started to feel some tingling. I got goosebumps, the chills.
Again, we know that there's military ships that are clearly way more advanced, and they are definitely, they're playing with us.
That we have a right. We should have a right as humans, specifically Americans, to go see this craft in a museum. So if it's not the Roswell that we're looking at, well, what about what crashed in 2008?
This is the idea, right? This is the idea.
Did it in plain sight?
Yeah, doesn't look like any quartz run that I've ever seen.
Is there no significance to what happened in the past? What's going on here?
Well, I mean, they certainly ought to bring this up, and we have the military involved. It's almost a false flag invasion.
It's my birthday!
It's your birthday!
Good evening, mate. I've never been called cutting edge before.
We did get a glimpse of another structure some miles away that had some sort of rectangular formation. Good evening and welcome to Dark Hour Paranormal. I am your host, Michael Roser, and today, folks, although I have been recently going out into the field, boots on the ground, to the location, unfortunately the weather has set me back a little bit today. So what I decided to do was to cover a particular location that has been fascinating me since 1991, and this place is known as DudleyTown in Cornwall, Connecticut. Now, there are lots of legends that surround this particular settlement, and it was established back in the 1700s, and of course that's plenty of time to have some sort of history, but how much of it is actually true? Within my research, of course I've done this extensively for many years, kept an eye on this place. I'm finding that the superstitions, is what I'll call them, surrounding this settlement are really unsubstantiated in most cases. There are a few legends that do uphold some part of the story in way of research in the history that it contains, but beyond that, we really can't find any trail to follow. So the intrigue about this place is that it is incredibly haunted with paranormal activity. Cryptozoology has certainly taken notice of this particular area, and yet, once again, we are not allowed to go and research this any further. It doesn't matter at what capacity. In fact, back in 2015, there was a radio show host from southern Connecticut who actually submitted a FOIA request to the town of Cornwall, along with the Dark Entry Forest Association, the organization that actually owns the land. Well, out of the two that he contacted in way of those organizations, the town of Cornwall came back to him and said, number one, we have no survey, current or antiquated, that goes along with this site. And of course, we understand that this sometimes does happen with some of these older settlements that are located throughout the Northeast. And in addition, we don't have any other information or documentation to provide you in way of what this land was all about. Now, the Dark Forest Entry Association actually took one leg up further and didn't respond whatsoever. And unfortunately, this is the course of action or behavior I have heard from this organization when anybody tries to reach out. Now, this radio personality was suggesting, at the very least, through the myriad of guests that he had on the show talking about this place, that they should maybe open up for one day, have a media day where they have a ranger or somebody from the association guide us through a tour of the old crumbling abandoned ruins over in DudleyTown, thus putting to rest the haunted mysteries and the dark legends that surround this place. Of course, once this was proposed, again, no response whatsoever. Now, I understand that during certain times, 70s and the 80s and even the early 90s, there were people going up and perhaps vandalizing or destroying some of the ruins that were still standing. To be honest with you, if they were doing something like this, all they would have been doing was knocking down certain structures, which in and of itself takes quite a bit of effort. My point in mentioning this is that there's no spray paint. There doesn't seem to be any broken damage in way of something physical that needs to be put back together, and yet we're not allowed to go there. Okay, so respecting the private property and the residents that live around DudleyTown in Cornwall, some of them still descendants of the first settlers that founded the town, we'll call it, why is it that I can go to almost any other antiquated settlement in Connecticut and do at least archaeological research? Gay City State Park is my first thought, okay? You can walk through acres of woods and find these old cellars and dwellings. There's no problem in being there. All right, so when I look at Dudleytown and we want to learn more about that history, about the rock composites, we want to learn about the water because people had said maybe some of the insanity or madness that people had claimed afflicted people of that town might have been from lead in the drinking water. Well, number one, I'll just mention I have a small problem with that because back in those days, people generally did not drink water straight. And the reason for that was because there was a lot of polluted water in and around some of the places that they would settle. Therefore, with the composites in the water rendering it undrinkable, I don't think this is actually the case. In fact, many times they would brew with it and they would drink wine or beer or something soft in way of that matter, and this is part of their diet. So again, people are talking about some of the land itself being the reason that people had dire experiences there. There were suicides, there were deaths, there were only a handful of murders, but I mean, to say what it was, it's still significant to note that this did happen. And of course, the insanity that has been observed or at least reported, they're trying to attribute this to something physical within the land, which I have no problem with as long as we can corroborate that in some scientific fashion. Archaeology would have a wonderful time, a wonderful opportunity to open up this particular area to that particular research, knowing that it was permitted and we were guided under the association to go and do this type of work. Dudleytown is actually somewhat of a misnomer and actually caught this moniker in the 1800s, I believe it was, well after the fact this had been established. What I understand is that the name Dudley is actually two separate components. Lee actually in a certain language at the time meant land. Now, I'm not sure if this was Native American, but this was the understanding for Lee. So when you put the family Dud in front of that D-U-D-D, and you add the Lee, you get Dudley. Therefore, this was Dud's land, is how that breaks down. So it was never actually a town, the way that we're calling it today. It was more of a village, and it was really isolated away from the rest of Cornwall, and perhaps this lent to some of the demise in way of the manufacturing that they were doing, the timber logging. They were very well known for that type of activity. They'd have to bring this stuff, all their raw materials and goods, down a very large mountain, which was incredibly arduous and unfortunately, again, may have lended to the closing of this site. But again, coming back to some of the legends in way of what people experienced there, I mean, Ed and Lorraine Warren had visited at one point and had mentioned that this whole area was demonically possessed, to use the words that they did. And I always take a little bit of what Ed and Lorraine said with a grain of salt, because even though they were very thorough demonologists, this was something brand new in way of description. Demonology was sort of coined, I think, by the Warrens in many respects and defined as their career moved forward and again throughout. But at the same time, I have to understand that they have a lot of experience under their belt. Now, with their religious beliefs as a filter in front of them, okay, maybe what they were describing as demonic was just something more ancient and non-human, as we have certainly come up against in many different ways long after the fact that they had been in DudleyTown. Through my research, I understand that the Quinnipiac used to inhabit this area, and there were, I think, 4 different sects, all based on the dialect of language that this particular tribe was using, again, using this area as their home. Now, what I also understand from my research is that there are a lot of Native American burial grounds right around this settlement. So could this have lent to some of the activity that people have experienced? In fact, when settlers come over and start setting up camp, for a lack of better definition, and creating a town, they're not compassionate or understanding to the land that they've just taken away from a group of people that had every right to own it and had owned it for years, or not even in the sense of ownership. The way the Native Americans looked at it was more of a synergistic relationship. They understood the good spirits, they understood the bad spirits, the way we would describe them today, and they would work together with those energies as appropriate. So, when you go into this type of space, again, I always bring this up. It might not have been DudleyTown itself. There was supposedly a curse that followed them from England, and again, this is one of the larger parts of the legend that has been dispelled and disproven. No way around it. There's no way that the family, the way that the tree went, actually kept certain monikers and surnames in way that they came over to what we now know as America and was cursed on that journey. Many years ago, things like medicine or certain care for well-being were very seldom and very difficult to attain. So you have situations where people were getting old world diseases as we define them today, and that was pretty much it. So polio, tuberculosis, these were really big problems for many families, and unfortunately, those who lived in DudleyTown were also afflicted with these issues. In one circumstance, and people do lend this to something more esoteric, but I think there's a more rational explanation, one of the inhabitants of DudleyTown, his wife was standing on a porch and was immediately struck by lightning one day as a rolling thunderstorm approached. Now, this is a very tragic scenario, but unfortunately, many years ago, we didn't have grounding rods and antennas that go onto houses, which in the event that something does hit us electrically, this is going to ground us again and go right through back into the earth. So there are many reports and stories of people sitting in their kitchens or in their living rooms back in the 1700s and 1800s, and lightning strikes the house and actually comes through the window, zipping right through past them, some of them experiencing that shock, some of them missing it entirely. But this was more commonplace than we understand today, and I think a lot of that knowledge has been lost over the years, unfortunately. But if you were to look at DudleyTown today, with the very few photographs and even sparser video images we have, you'll see that there's really not much left there. Stone cellars, as I mentioned, rock walls. There are some beautiful falls out in that area, which would make such a wonderful day of hiking at the very least, even if you just stayed on the trail, keeping within the legality of the area. At the very end of the day, physically, there's not much there, but many people go to this place and describe some sort of paranormal interaction. What I would like to do is to appeal to the Dark Forest Entry Association and ask them to open up to the possibility that one day, all of this, paranormal stuff aside, you would allow us into the site to look at this from an archaeological angle and perhaps read the soil or read some of the rock compositions and see if they're high in iron the way that people have reported, and see if there's lead in the water the way that people have surmised. At least, if nothing else, Dark Forest Entry Association, this is going to clear the area of all the superstition and legends that drive people in droves to come to illegally investigate on your land. So, as much as I'd like to say that this is something that may appeal at some point and that it may be heard, I have a feeling that it will fall on deaf ears if it even reaches the bench. But it's at least worth a try. Now, there's one other town out here in Connecticut that you're not allowed to go to, but if you get explicit permission from the landowners, they will allow you to go out and at least survey the location. This place is known as Barahack in Pomfret, and of course I've been intrigued with this area as well, but have a much better chance of one day visiting rather than DudleyTown, which is entirely off limits, it seems, no matter what. Now, the curious thing I want to point out very quickly about DudleyTown and the residents that live there today, they are incredibly aggressive when it comes to people in that area. In 1999, they actually blocked all access to hiking out in those trails, obviously a measure to still keep people away. Now, we understand that this is known as a preserve today, some sort of wildlife preserve, okay, and I understand that, and that is completely fine in so many different respects, okay? There's nothing to argue with there. However, the ferocity with which these people protect the land, showing up in a pickup truck on the land with a shotgun pointed at kids, telling them to leave or there's going to be consequences. People walking through the woods being stalked by residents who come out of their houses purposefully, being chased by several cars out of the area where you parked, which was down by the base of the mountain. I mean, it seems almost cultish in the way that this particular area is patrolling the Dudleytown ruins and, of course, the state forest that surrounds it. It's really curious. What secrets do you have? What are you keeping from us? There are reports of people who have walked through the woods and seen people robed in black dress and perhaps around a circle in some sort of ritualistic fashion. So I understand there are separate groups that may seek to go into the woods and do this type of work, but if you have cameras in all of the trees out there, Dark Forest Entry Association, what are we doing here? What's going on? Is it you? Is it your residents? Is it the people of the family that are descendants going out there and utilizing the magic of this land? What do you know that we don't and you are keeping from us? There's nothing worse than secrets when it comes to this type of work and research, because we're always looking for some clarity. Listen, if you can prove to me that this place has no magical qualities whatsoever, that Dan Aykroyd was wrong in calling this one of the most haunted places in America, then show me. But until you do, there are going to be people who are very curious about this location, and they're going to research it to the best of their ability, and when they find that fruitless, they're going to try and visit. Now, I don't encourage anyone to trespass on private property. I'm a big proponent of that, of course. But at the same time, there has to be some sort of reasonable balance here. If we can assure that the folks that are traveling in through this area are not going to damage it or destroy it in any way, what's the harm in giving us access? It's a very, very curious legend. I haven't outlined the majority of what's gone into this, but I've done that purposefully in way of omittance because I haven't gone deep into the legends of this place in Cornwall, but that's for the reason that I think a lot of it is built around some sort of superstition or urban endeavor. I certainly encourage you all to check out this location in the various ways you can through Google, even Google Maps. won't allow you to get a street view down there. I don't know if that's because the cameras are not reaching under the canopy or if there's something else more intentional in way of that seclusion. But long story short, it's very difficult to research. But I still have questions about why such secrecy. Why such protection? Again, I've been in areas where I maybe shouldn't have, and I was trespassing on land where I didn't realize, and somebody would approach me and say, hey, listen, you can't be here. I'm so sorry, no problem. I did not mean to cause an issue. Let me go peacefully. And I've never had an issue. It was always a misunderstanding. So if somebody finds themselves out in the woods there and is greeted by somebody with a shotgun and somebody else stalking them behind them with 4 cars waiting for you out at the edge of the forest, it's a little intimidating, and perhaps that organization and those residents are actually doing their job. But it's something I wanted to highlight, and of course, not being able to go out today physically into certain locations, I wanted to provide a little bit of what I can't actually get into, but still is sitting on the back burner and certainly capturing my intrigue, and will until the very last structure sinks into the ground forever obscured from view. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us tonight. I appreciate you being here and exploring this idea and the topic of DudleyTown in Cornwall, Connecticut, along with me. And believe me, if any one of you have access to a contact of an individual within the association, please don't hesitate to reach out. I would love to speak with someone, albeit it's very difficult to find any contact information. And again, as I mentioned earlier, they don't seem to want to speak much themselves. Thank you very much. We'll see you back tomorrow with another fantastic show. I will be on location. I have that already set up. Rain or shine, I will be out. And in the meantime, stay explorative, stay curious, and continue to question this beautifully nebulous field that we are all searching together. Ciao.
If the crash retrievals are true, then all bets are off.
It's very hard for people to get their minds around where the real power is. And it's not at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The reality is something much more stark.
They've been working on this for 60, 70, perhaps 80 years.
The reason why the government is talking about these UFOs now, they're getting ready for the next level of war.
Are these objects a national security concern?
They're proffering a narrative of a national security threat that doesn't exist.
I call them alien reproduction vehicles. They're made by private corporations somewhere on this planet.
Technology from Roswell from 1947 has largely been held back from us.
Portal technology, teleportation, whatever you can imagine, it's already been done.
The biggest secrets are not the zero-point energy and electrogravitics. It's the science of consciousness. All their communication systems are moving through the consciousness field and are thought actuated. The people at the CIA call it WSFM, weird science and frickin' magic. The transdimensional interstellar technology will benefit humanity.
There has been tremendous disinformation.
The media is keeping secrets with the government.
These are lethal, vicious people. And I'm focused on exposing the extraordinary technologies that they want to keep secret. No aspect of life on Earth will be unaffected by it.